I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 87 of EO Radio Show. Today, I'm covering the rules that apply to a new charitable organization that wants expedited review of its application for recognition of exempt status from the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS expects to receive 135,000 to 140,000 determination letter requests in 2024, and most of those requests will take more than 6 months to be processed. In general, the IRS reviews applications in the order received. New organizations often need that determination letter in order to start fundraising, and 6 months or more is a serious damper on the ability to launch the new entity. This episode will cover the required procedures to follow if an organization wants the IRS to let it jump to the front of the line. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. In his remarks to a June 17, 2024 presentation by the IRS Commissioner for Tax-Exempt and Government Entities, Edward Killen, at the AICPA and CIMA Not-for-Profit Industry Conference, he commented that in 2023, the IRS received about 130,000 determination letter requests. He mentioned that when he arrived at the IRS in 2019, the number of applications was around 100,000 or so, and that number continues to climb every year. The IRS expects to trend somewhere around 135,000 to 140,000 this year. So that number does continue to go up, and the IRS has made it a goal to make sure that it is mobilized to be able to respond to that number. As of June of 2024, the IRS had received about 95,000 or so determination requests already, according to Mr. Killen. One of the first questions I get from a new organization is how long does it take to get that darn determination letter? My usual timeline starts with 5 customary gates on the path to completing the formation and launch of a new charity. First stage is the formation of the charitable entity in the selected state or jurisdiction. The incorporation process typically takes about 2 weeks. Even though the actual filing in the selected state sometimes can be expedited, the mechanics of preparing and filing the incorporation documents usually take about 2 weeks. For more details on the filing procedures, we've covered the requirements of about 32 states in previous episodes of the show. So check out the state filings playlist in the show notes to see if we've already covered the specifics of the timeline and process for incorporation in your state. The second step in the process is preparation of the governing documents, which includes the bylaws, board policies, and approval of necessary corporate actions by the incorporator or the initial board of directors. The timeline for this stage depends on how many individuals are involved, whether approvals from other organizations are also required, the time it takes to select the officers and get them on board, and other formalities. Typically, this stage takes at least several weeks and sometimes several months. Once these 2 steps are completed and the board of directors and officers are installed, the corporation is in the position for Stage 3, which is the preparation of the detailed representations needed for the IRS application for recognition of exempt status, which is known as the IRS Form 1023. New organizations with a very modest budget, that is, less than $50,000 in projected income for the first 3 years of operations, assets of less than $250,000, and some other requirements, those organizations can choose to use IRS Form 1023-EZ. There is a link to the instructions for the Form 1023-EZ in the show notes, so check that out if you think you could qualify for the shorter form application. But beware that the 1023-EZ is not eligible for the expedite procedure, so you may find it better to file a regular Form 1023 with an expedite request if you have a very compelling reason for expedited review. So once the application is filed, many organizations can start fundraising from what I call friends and family. That is, those people who are familiar with the organization and are comfortable making contributions without the assurance that the contribution will be deductible from the donor's taxable income. And that assurance comes from the IRS determination letter. But like I said, some donors don't really care about the IRS determination letter, So actually having the application filed can be enough to get started with some fundraising. Stage 4 in the process of the organizational formalities is the registration with the states where the new organization will be operating. In many states, the registration is required once the entity begins operating, so it is not dependent on the receipt of the IRS determination letter, although that letter will eventually have to be provided to the relevant registries. Our episodes on state filings include the state charity regulator notes for the various states, so check those out for introductory information about the registration requirements in your state of formation and other states where you will be soliciting or operating. Stage 5 is usually the final step, and that is applying for income tax exemption in the state where organized and any other states where the organization will be generating taxable income. State tax exemption is not necessary in all states, but it is an important step in the process to determine whether any state exemptions are available to your new organization. Most of those exemptions require the IRS determination letter in order to give the state exemption, so usually this is the final stage of the formation process. So to recap, the time to allow for all of these stages depends on the particular circumstances of each new organization, and the biggest drivers are at the front end. Those are the amount of time it takes to get the board and officers in place and the governance documents approved, the preparation and filing of the Form 1023, and then the long wait for the IRS to approve the exemption request. The parts that are under the control of the organizers are all the prep work up to the time of the filing, and that's usually at least 3 months. And as noted above, the IRS review more often than not takes at least 6 months, sometimes quicker, sometimes much longer if there are questions about the application. So, with that long introduction, how can the timeline be expedited? Well, for one thing, start with a motivated board and founders who are willing and able to respond quickly to the formation requirements. So, moving to the heart of the matter, if an organization wants to be considered for expedited treatment, the request must be made at the time the IRS Form 1023 is filed. For expedited processing to be granted, there must be a compelling reason to process the case ahead of others. Compelling reasons include the following. Number 1, a pending grant, where failure to secure the grant will have an adverse impact on the organization's ability to continue operating. The second option for expedited review is when a newly created organization is providing disaster relief to victims of particular emergencies. And the third one that's listed by the IRS is when the IRS errors have caused undue delays in issuing a determination letter. So that third category is very rarely seen. I haven't seen that. The other two categories, though, I have used for clients that are applying for expedited review. For a request to expedite the review based on a pending grant, the following specific information would help to support a request for expedited processing. The name of the person or organization committed to giving the grant or asset, the amount of the grant or the value of the asset, the date the grant will be forfeited or permanently redirected to another organization, the impact on the organization's operations if it does not receive the grant or asset, and a signature of the principal officer or authorized representative of the grantor. A request for expedited processing must be made in writing and must fully explain the compelling reason for expedited review. Granting expedited processing is completely at the discretion of the IRS. And as noted above, an organization cannot request expedited handling of a Form 1023-EZ. The IRS website provides several examples of expedited handling requests that it will approve for expedited treatment. So here are the 3 examples that serve as good guidelines for requesting expedited review. Example 1 deals with disaster relief. In this example, the applicant is stated to have been formed to help victims of an earthquake find temporary housing. The applicant applies for tax-exempt status within a few weeks or months from the date the disaster occurred. The applicant plans to hold a major fundraiser, and a popular rock band volunteered its services for the concert. Income from the event is expected to be a significant source of the organization's annual revenues, and plans are to disperse the majority of these funds to find temporary housing for the victims of the earthquake. Under the IRS website, this type of a request would be approved. The second example is for a pending grant. In this example, the applicant anticipates gross receipts of $100,000 in its first year to carry out its purpose of feeding the homeless in a particular community. Shortly after the organization applies for tax-exempt status, it is promised a one-time $50,000 grant from a private foundation. The grant, though, is contingent on the applicant organization being recognized as exempt under Section 501c3 by a specified date. The expedite request is approved by the IRS because a significant portion of the organization's annual income is contingent on the pending grant, and the funds will be lost if exemption is not granted by the specified date. In the third example of a pending grant justifying expedited review, an organization submits the application for exemption and indicates it plans to operate a drug and alcohol treatment center for teens. The previous center closed years earlier, and there is no other substance abuse center within the area. A named member of the community promises to donate a specific amount that will cover the cost of building the new center if the applicant organization can provide proof of exemption by a specified date. Because the organization cannot open the treatment center without funding for the building, the expedite request is approved. On the other hand, the IRS has also provided examples of organizations that would not qualify for expedited processing. In the first example they deal with a disaster relief applicant that was formed to secure housing for homeless and educate individuals regarding the dangers of hurricanes. Its operations are conducted in several states in the South. The organization's application is pending review when a major hurricane affecting states other than those in which the applicant operates hits. The organization requests expedited treatment and indicates that it is providing disaster relief. Because it conducts no activity in the states impacted by the hurricane, the IRS would not approve this sort of an expedite request. The second example deals with a pending grant. In this example, an organization whose purpose is to provide housing for low-income individuals submits an application for exemption. The organization must provide proof of 501c3 exemption to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that is the federal HUD, before it can receive funds. The applicant does not qualify for expedited treatment because it does not have a commitment for grant funds by a specified date. So that's a kind of circular one. You often can't apply for these government grants until you have your determination letter, and so you can't get a commitment without a determination letter. So you can't ask for expedited treatment. The third example of organizations that will not qualify for expedited processing involves an organization that plans to raise $50,000 annually and make distributions to fire victims in a particular community. When it applies for exemption, it has a commitment from a specific business to donate $500 to the organization once the organization can provide proof of its exempt status. The request to expedite processing is not approved because the grant of $500 is insignificant compared to the organization's annual revenue that it expects and will not have a major impact on the organization's ability to operate. For an organization that has determined that its application is a good candidate for expedited treatment, as soon as the 1023 is submitted online, the written request for expedited processing can be sent to the IRS office in Cincinnati, and it can be sent by express mail, overnight delivery service, or by fax. The addresses are in the show notes. Note that the written request must include a compelling reason that fits within the guidelines just discussed. The request doesn't need to be lengthy, but it should be signed by the grantor if the rationale is potential loss of grant funds if the determination lot is not received, but it should identify the applicant clearly and include its EIN. If the request is made by an officer of the organization based on disaster relief or one of the other compelling reasons, the request will need to be signed by an officer of the applicant. There is no particular form required for the request letters, but it does need to identify the applicant clearly and include the taxpayer identification number. So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the IRS pages on expedited treatment. Also, Farella, Braun, and Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists for the EO Radio Show podcast that can help with the organization formalities and choice of entity. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. If you have suggestions for topics that you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.